award-winning author of 7 books, 3 memoirs, 2 novels, and 2 collections of poetry. Child is her most recent, which we're going to hear about Miss Maddie's story and her relationship with Judy. It was a Katie Couric Media Must-Read book. Now, you know I like Katie Couric books. And it's gone into 2 printings, so that's big news. That's a big deal. She's also written a really sweet memoir about her husband's misexperience, but together, a memoir of marriage and a medical mishap, which I'm sure we can all relate to.
Husband, alert.
Okay, and her work has appeared in USA Today, Washington Post, Real Simple, which I read a lot, so I have to go back and look at my issues, and lots of literary journals. To her left is her lovely daughter, Laurie Smithwick. Just like that last name, I've never seen it before. When you're in genealogy and special collection history, you see a surname, it's like, not seeing that one at work. Anyway, yes, it's weird, but you get used to it. She's an abstract painter, printmaker, and muralist. She is Charlotte born and raised, which is a rarity. And she's a practicing artist. And as soon as she could hold a pencil, you know, that is one of my greatest regrets in life, that I cannot draw or leaf lit. But I can next comment to it. She started art and creative writing at Duke University, don't anyone boo, and graphic design and photography at the Parsons School of Design. Her design Grammy nomination, and she has exhibited her art in New York, Raleigh, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Charlotte, and held her first solo show in 2018. So, please make welcome Judy Goldman.
So Sheila, first you, thank you. Thank you for your introduction. Thank you for organizing this, making it happen. Thank you for bringing all these people here.
Thank you all for coming out.
Thank you for everything you've done. I really, really appreciate you. And speaking of all of you here, thank y'all so much for coming. I mean, isn't this the longest day of the year? I mean, you could be out doing something else. You could be riding your bike or hiking or doing a lot of fun things, and you decided to come here. So thank you for making that decision. Laurie, I have a whole lot to say about Laurie. This book should say Child by Judy Goldman and Laurie Smithwick, because she has done so much where this book is concerned. I cannot even name everything she's done. First of all, she designed the cover, and isn't it just a gorgeous cover? And she did all my technology stuff. I mean, as recently as this afternoon, I mean, I'm always having problems, and she's always solving them. And I want to say one more thing. Laurie has an exhibit right now at a wonderful restaurant in Charlotte called Artisan's Palate. And the exhibit will be up for 1 more week. Write it down. Look, she's writing it down. Artisan's Palate. It's a fabulous exhibit. So go see it. You got 1 week left.
And the food's good too.
The food is delicious. And the food is fabulous at Artisan's Palate. It's really a neat place.
Where is it?
It's in Nodon.
In Nodon.
On 36th Street and the Plaza.
Did y'all hear that? Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're here to talk about Child, and Laurie is going to ask me some questions, and we're going to just talk. So let's start.
All right. So before we start, I have something I like to do before I do any public speaking. Everybody smile. Thank you.
Okay. You got everybody in?
Did.
Okay. See, technology.
We're going to do things a little bit differently. Actually, my amazing mom is going to do things a little differently today. Instead of standing up at a podium and talking about her book and reading from her book, we decided to shake things up a little bit, and I am going to interview her about writing this book, about the subject of this book. All right? So before we get too much into the details of things, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what this book is about?
Okay, so, Child tells a story of my relationship with Maddie Culp, the Black woman who worked for my family, lived in, helped raise me, the unconscionable scaffolding on which that relationship was built, and the deep love. It also tells the story of Maddie's child who was left behind to be raised by somebody else. And I'll tell a little bit more. Maddie came to work for my family in 1944. I was 3, she was 26. And she and I stayed very closely involved with each other until she died at age 89. When I was little, I said the same thing to her over and over and over. And this is what I said to her. Maddie, when you get old, I'll take care of you. And she always answered exactly the same way. She always said, I know you will, child, for sure. I know you will. Because I looked at our relationship as having 2 parts. Part 1, she took care of me. Part 2, I took care of her. Now, there's a part 3 to our relationship, and that's the part where I write a book and tell the world about the wonderfulness of Maddie Culp. So I think that sort of gives you the groundwork for what the book is about.
So I know a lot of you have already read this memoir, and I know because I sold the book to you tonight that many of you intend to read it. But I thought maybe it would be fun for you right now to cheat a little bit and just tell us a little bit about Maddie.
Okay. I love that question. I love that question. But it scares me a little bit because how do you describe somebody whom you were so in love with? Isn't that a hard thing to do that? But I'm gonna give it my best shot. Here we go. She was openly affectionate. She was an amazing listener. When you were in a conversation with her, she really heard what you said, and it was eyeball to eyeball. She was a stunning observer of how the world works. So when you were in a conversation with her, you learned something. You knew more than you knew before the conversation started. And here's something that I think we don't think about Maddie very much. And that is that she was so creative. She was really playful and imaginative. And I want to tell you a little example of that. And this is from a scene in the book. One morning, maybe I was 6 years old, something like that. Maddie said, we're going to Woolworths. So she and I took a cab, Veterans Cab Company. We took a cab to Main Street. The people from Rockville are nodding their heads because I said it for them because they know Veterans Cab Company. Anyway, we took a cab to Woolworths and we are looking through all the crepe paper. And she's telling me to pick out the colors that I like. So I picked out the colors that I like. Then we went back home. And Maddie took that crepe paper and turned it into all these crepe paper dresses for me. Now, have you ever heard of crepe paper dresses? No, don't say you have, because I know it would be a lie if you said you've heard of crepe paper dresses before this minute. But she made me crepe paper dresses. She used pinking shears for a little zigzaggy hem. She used her portable sewing machine and actually sewed the paper. And here's the thing about the crepe paper dresses. I mean, I wore those dresses till they just disintegrated. I mean, you know, I guess I was walking around half naked with my little crepe paper thing, shreds on me.
can't imagine that took long.
But I was a clueless kid, so, you know, I probably didn't notice. But I just wanted the world to see how Maddie could just make every single thing shimmery. You know, that was my purpose. I just wanted to show off those dresses because I was showing her off with those dresses. And I want to say one more thing about Maddie, and that is, she always saw the best in you, which meant you did everything you could to deserve that. And that's pretty inspiring for a kid, isn't it? Pretty inspiring. So, all right, but I gotta turn the question over to you. So how would you describe Maddie? And you looking to see how much time we have?
Yes, on my bracelets. So, I'll tell you how I felt about Maddie with a sort of, you know, lateral story. So, the sad story of my life is that by the time I was in the 6th grade, all of my grandparents had passed away. One of them I didn't really know, he died when I was 2, and the rest all died within 2 years from 5th to 6th grade. And that was really sad because I had amazing grandparents and I didn't get to have them for very long. But the truth of the matter is, by the time I was an adult, I didn't even know that I hadn't had grandparents because I had Maddie. And I'm not exaggerating that point. I mean, that really and truly, anybody who had a wonderful relationship with any one of their grandparents, that was what I had with Maddie. And that's how wonderful she was. That not only did she take care of you and make you feel beloved your whole life, she did the same thing for your children and your nieces and nephews. And so I just feel like Maddie was as much a part of my life as anybody, as much a part of my family as anybody who was actually related by blood to me. And then a funny story that I love to tell about how Maddie, you wanted Maddie's approval, and Maddie made you want to do your best at anything. When I first started dating my husband, Bob, we dated for a long time before
Bob
we got married.
Bob alert. Go ahead.
So the first time I brought Bob home, we were living in New York City, and the first time I brought Bob home to Charlotte for Thanksgiving, it was a big family thing, and so we all went in to be where all the family was, and then as soon as I could, I brought Bob into the kitchen so that I could introduce Bob to Maddie. And I introduced them, and the three of us stood there talking for really a minute or two, maybe. And I think in that very short time, I took an opportunity, probably because I was nervous, to make a joke about Bob. And Maddie immediately claimed him and said, "Don't you talk that way about my Bob." And from that moment on, he was her Bob, which was the highest honor anybody could claim. That's how we all felt about it. All right, so we love Maddie. I think that's established. Clear. We've all got that. But the truth of the matter is, this is not an easy story to tell. First of all, the relationships between black families and white families have a long, tricky history, difficult, and we're living in extremely charged times right now. So I'm very curious, while you were writing this story and while you were going through the publishing of this manuscript, were you nervous?
Nah. Nothing scares me. You know that, right? Laurie, what should I do about this? Oh, Lordy.
And just to put a fine point on it, I just want to, make things really start. You're a privileged white woman.
Yes.
What are you doing writing about a black maid?
Yeah, that's the thing. That's what makes this story difficult to tell, right? I mean, who in her right mind would write a book, being a privileged white woman writing about her black maid. Yeah, the whole time I was writing the book, there was part of me saying, I don't think you're gonna really do anything with this book. But let me go back a ways. I really should go back. And here's how long I've wanted to write this book. Let me tell that first, how long I've wanted to write this very book. So, I'm 80 right now.
Ooh.
Oh.
You
don't look that old. I mean, this is so awful. I'm so shameless. I've been giving all these talks for these months, and every single group I talk to, I do that. I mean, I make the audience tell me that I don't look 80. And that's not all I do. You do the same thing. It's so bad. And I mean, even in conversations, I work it into the conversation, and then I wait a minute. To say it to me. Okay, so I'm sorry. All right, here we go. 40 years ago, when I was 40, I started taking myself seriously as a writer, and I started writing poetry. The first poem I wrote as an adult was a poem about the triangle we made. Maddie, the child she did not raise, and the child she did raise, the three of us. I wrote the poem, showed it to my husband Henry, and immediately put it in my drawer. I did not show it to a soul. I didn't send it to any literary journal. I didn't do anything with that poem because I knew too delicate a subject. You can't write about this, Judy. You won't do a good job, so don't even try. Okay, then, move forward through the years. I think that as I hit my 70s and that big 80 was looming out there, I thought, if I don't tell this story now, I'm not gonna ever tell it. This is it. This is when I tell the story, if I'm gonna tell it. So that's when I started writing the book in my 70s. It took me about 3 years to write the book. And I think that the reason it took that long, because it's a pretty short book, I mean, it's like a pamphlet almost. It's so short. I cannot write a long book. But I think that the reason it took me so long was because I was so afraid of writing this book and tackling this subject. How do you do it?
So what were some of the things you were afraid of?
Okay, so, what if it just turned out to be an old lady's sentimental love story? What if that's what I wrote? What if I didn't fully examine the power dynamic between my family and the black woman who worked for us? What if I didn't really expose the brutality of the Jim Crow South in the 40s and 50s, and the lack of choices Maddie had? You've heard me say this. Writers are poor, pitiful, pathetic creatures. And we just want to be liked. We want to be liked like everybody else. So what if people don't like this book? That's a big risk. I tell students in my writing workshops, you have to write about what keeps you up at night. You have to write about the subjects that you're obsessed with, and you have to write the stories that scare you. If we're not scaring ourselves with our writing, if we're not unmasking, if we're not revealing, if we're not uncovering, if we're not laying bare what there is to lay bare, then we don't have our subject. So if that's what qualifies a subject to be your subject, this was my subject.
So how do you do that?
You go one word at a time. I'll tell you a rule I made for myself. And you know I love rules.
Right. I'll give you a quick sidebar. When COVID first hit, and we all had to hunker down in our own separate homes, our hidey holes, I was talking to a friend of mine, who knows that my parents are 80 and above, and she asked how they were doing. And I said, oh my gosh, my mom was made for this moment. She loves to follow rules. And she loves to be alone. So it was sort of perfect, honestly.
It was. I love the pandemic. It was great. I didn't have to go anyway. Stayed in my pajamas. What was the question?
How did you do it?
Okay.
How did you run through your fears?
So I made a rule for myself, and I think once I made this rule for myself, I could write the book. And the rule is, I decided I was not ever gonna be in Maddie's head in this book. I would only be in my own head. I could never presume to know what Maddie was thinking, only what I'm thinking. That was my rule. Because it's my story. It's my story of our relationship. I cannot write Maddie's story of our relationship. Now, honestly, you know, I knew what Maddie was thinking. I mean, I could have written what she was thinking, but for the sake of the book, I never was inside her head. And I think that enabled me to write the book.
You're just telling your story.
Exactly. And anybody who wants to write memoir or personal essays, that's a tip. That's what you do. You tell the story only you can tell. That's what we have to do as writers.
So that does make me want to ask you though, you obviously spent many, many years with Maddie. Were you ever aware of Maddie questioning her place in your world? Or challenged by her place in your world?
Next question.
Okay.
No, wait.
That was a good one, right?
A little bit too good. I have to really think about this. So,
It's in the
maybe.
book.
What?
It's in the book.
It's in the book, so do I just say, Laurie, read the book?
But, it's that portion where, and I thought about this because Maddie was old school, like your parents were, and it was hard for her to readjust during the civil rights period.
Thank
She
you.
was old school.
You are so right, Sheila, thank you. I'm taking you with me to all my other talks. No, that's exactly the answer, you're right. So she, what did she say? So I'm gonna tell y'all the whole thing. Yeah, 2 scenes actually from the book, really. I'm gonna tell the first scene first, then I'm gonna get to your scene, what you're talking about. So in 1957, my brother, who is 8 years older than I am, was at Fort Jackson, stationed at Fort Jackson. And he called home and said that he had become really good friends with another guy in the Army at Fort Jackson, and who was from New Jersey, and he wanted to bring him home to Rock Hill, South Carolina, where we live, for dinner and to spend the weekend. He'd enjoy being in a comfortable bed, he'd enjoy having good food. The friend was black. Now this is in 1957. I don't remember any discussion about it with my parents or any back and forth, Maddie, nothing. It was just, he was coming to spend the weekend. Except for one thing that was a little bit different. And you mentioned this earlier, Suzanne. And that is our breakfast room where we would be eating dinner together was very close to our neighbor's breakfast room window, like this. And right before everybody came, right before my brother and his friend came and we all settled in to eat, I saw my mother close the curtains in the breakfast room because she did not want our neighbors to see our company for fear there would be some upheaval over it. Okay, now we're sitting around the table, my father, my mother, my brother, his friend, my sister, and me, Maddie has prepared the meal, Maddie serves the meal, and we're all sort of aware that Maddie has this sort of scornful expression on her face. She is not happy, and she's putting the plates down instead of putting them down, or the serving dishes, she's putting them down. You know, I mean, they are solidly down on the table, and the whole meal goes like that. We never asked her what was going on. She never mentioned it. You didn't talk about things like that. It was too delicate a subject to talk about then. But years later, I brought it up with Maddie, and I said, what was going on with you that night? Do you remember it? Oh yes, I remember it. She said that she was thinking, what right did that boy have to sleep in our house, use the same bathroom as the rest of the family, which all of us did, Maddie included, living with us. She did not like it, and then she ended it with, I was just old-fashioned, she said, and I didn't think anything like that was possible. And then her last sentence was, I just wasn't ready for it.
It reminded me of that scene in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
Yeah.
And the maid just slaps the food down in front of Sidney Poitier, because, you know, she's not happy that he's there.
It was, and the other way that we were all a family, and yet, and my book is full of those things. We were this, and yet, it's both. So we stayed close throughout, and she would come. I'm married with children, my sister's married with children, we're both living in Charlotte. We have a lot of big family dinners, Thanksgiving, Passover, all kinds of things. Maddie would come, and she would never sit at the table with our family if it was a big family dinner like that. She just would not. And what were her excuses?
There was always an excuse. She was too full, she had eaten all while she was cooking.
Can't eat anymore, I'm gonna close my eyes a little bit, I'm gonna sit in the kitchen, never do it. She would eat with our family if it was just my husband, me, Laurie, and Laurie's brother, Mike. If it was just the four of us, she would eat with us. And I don't think she ate with my sister's family. I think she just, point of pride. But, and that's another way that she showed her awareness of the times that we were living in and the limits that those times put on all of us.
I think also, if I could
Join in.
This is the sort of thing that we talk about when we look back through history and we say, well, everybody was okay with the way things were, right? But that doesn't mean that it was okay, right? We can recognize that even though everybody was okay with that, quote unquote, they were okay with it for reasons that need to be examined and unpacked and discarded, because it's not okay. Maddie should have been eating dinner with us all along. We should have been helping Maddie cook dinner, you know, et cetera, back until 1940.
I think that. Well, I'm not gonna help you out, because I can't do math either. We're sort of sunk up here. But I think that what I wanted to do in the book was glorify and vilify. You know, I wanted to glorify Maddie, but I wanted to vilify the segregated world that created that relationship, that made that relationship possible. And I think I wanted to honor our relationship and all that it was, but I wanted to expose our relationship and all that it could not be. And there was so much of this back and forth with my book. If I assumed this, is it just being defensive? You know, it was a lot to figure out in writing this book, more so than any other book I think I've written.
So, to focus on the writing, do you have any other tips for those of us, now that you've written 3 memoirs? Have you learned anything, or do you feel like you figured anything out? Can you teach us how to write memoirs right in the time that we're on?
Right, huh? I know nothing about writing memoirs, because every book you begin it's as though you have never written before. That's the truth of it. It is such, each book is its own set of problems to solve, its own collection of mistakes that you make that you then have to correct in revision.
What's that great quote that you say? Every book is
this is Iris Murdoch's quote, every book is a perfect wreck of a good idea. Yes. And I'll say something about that. So you do have a vision before you write a book. You have an idea of what the book is going to be about. But the problem is you can never get that idea down on paper. Somehow or other, what you put on the page is always a disappointment, always. In fact, you've heard me say this before, if y'all could see inside my brain, I mean, you would see what a fabulous writer I am. I mean, when it's up here, it's just great. It's gonna be so great. But then it's a disappointment because you just don't get down on paper what you want to get down. But having said all that, and I like to say that to people who want to write, because I want to let you know that we just do the best we can with our writing, and the main thing, the best advice I can give is really two words, and those of you who've been in workshops of mine before have heard me say this before: show up, that's what you have to do, because too many people want to have written, but not that many people want to actually do the writing. And it's not digging ditches, it's not collecting recycling, it's not hard in that way, but it's hard work and it requires showing up. If not every day, on some kind of regular schedule that you devise for yourself that works for you. And I'll tell you, I love giving advice. my brother says the 6 sweetest words in my language are, "What do you think about this, Judy?" And he takes my advice. That's amazing. But unlike my children. Anyway, also in writing memoir, you have to be twice as hard on yourself as you are on anybody else. That's a rule.
On any other character?
Well, on anybody else in the book. Thank you. Yeah, you have to be twice as hard on yourself as anybody else in your book. You have a tendency to sort of, present a really good image, and you just can't do that. You have to just be honest, because that's the contract a memoirist makes with the reader, that you're going to be as honest as you possibly can. You're going to tell the truth as well as you can. But on the other hand, once you start remembering, you're distorting. What do you leave in? What do you leave out? That is changing the memory right there. And that's okay, because that's part of it. But your contract is to be as honest as you possibly can with the reader.
So how do you keep a memoir from being just a list of memories?
When you start off writing memoir, when I wrote my first memoir, I thought it was really enough just to have a listing of the things that I wanted to tell about, a listing of the memories that were important to me and that were part of this subject that I had chosen. But if you do that, if you just have if you just write down a list of all the things that happened to you, then what you end up with is a list of all the things that happened to you. It's not a memoir. Here's how you turn it into a memoir, and here's another bit of advice. And I think I didn't learn this aspect of memoir writing until my last memoir, the memoir that I wrote before this one. And this is a really important part of writing memoir, that you need brief sparks of reflection throughout the book. It's not enough just to list the memories, but you analyze those memories. You interpret the memories. This is why I'm telling this story, you see. And that's what turns the memories into memoir. And I'll go a little bit further with that. What you need is two voices in memoir. And those of you who've read my book, think about how I work these two voices in, because this was real important to me when I was writing this memoir, particularly. You need the voice of innocence, which is the listing of the details. This is what happened to me. Here's the story. Here's what happened. Child Judy looking at her relationship with Maddie, right? How I saw it when I was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all along. And then you also need the voice of experience, which is adult Judy looking back on that time. What does it all funnel down to? What does it all boil down to? Why am I even telling this story? That's the voice of experience. And so I'll say one more thing about that, and that is the important question that you ask yourself when you're writing memoir is, what do I know now that I did not know then? Isn't that a good question? What do I know now in everything? I mean, when you think about your memories, even if you don't write, it's something interesting to sort of explore about yourself. What do I know now that I didn't know then? And that was important, especially in this book, to bring in all the different sides of this story.
Can I ask you one more question? All right. This is just sort of a fun question. What do you think Maddie would say about this book?
Oh gosh. I'm gonna answer and then I'm gonna ask you what you think. Because I'd be real curious to know what you would say to that, what answer you would give to that question. I think she would love that I wrote about her and love reliving the memories that I relive in this book, that I love reliving while I was writing them. But I think she would be embarrassed by the attention. I don't think she would be okay with the attention. I think she would love the photograph of her in the book. There's a wonderful photograph of her from 1944 at the beginning of the book. I think she would love that being in the book. What do you think? What's your answer to that?
So I sort of picture two Maddies when I think about that. The first one is the Maddie that you would be talking to as you remembered things. I can picture you calling her and saying, Maddie, listen, do you remember this? And listen, you know, I can just imagine me sitting in the kitchen watching you talk on the phone with her. And that would be like an hour-long phone call talking about that. And I love the idea of you going down memory lane with her and talking about how much your life with her meant to you. I think that her embarrassment over being the center of attention would take the form of almost making fun of you, saying like that you made things up, that you didn't tell the story right.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
or oh Judy, you're always, you know, doing things.
Coming up with ideas.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
But I think she would be
that's
really
true.
proud of you. I'm sorry she doesn't know that you've written this many books and have, at this point, written this one about her. I would love to tell her what all you've done.
The closest I came to Maddie reading this book is her best friend who worked for the family who lived behind us. And her best friend, Panetta, was in our house a lot. So I knew Panetta very well, and I kept in touch. Panetta and I stayed friends forever too. And all while I was writing the book, I called Panetta with a lot of questions that I had, and she filled in a lot of things. And she's in this book too. She's a star in this book. And she died about 2 months before the book came out. So she did not get to see the book, which just...
She passed up her chance to read it. She said she wanted to
Exactly.
wait until she read the
Oh,
book.
I kept saying, oh, Panetta, I'm gonna send you the manuscript. Lord, don't send it. I wanna hold that book in my hand, she said. I wanna hold that book in my hand. So she did not make it, so that was sad to me. But I think maybe we'll end on that sad note. And, wait, and yes, have questions, yes. And any questions that y'all have, we would be happy to answer, either one of us.
Well, I have a question for all of you. How many of you had a Maddie? My Maddie quit. Her name was Ann. She quit because my mother quit, and my parents could no longer afford her, so my brother remembers her, I do not. So that goes to show you're not alone. It's that shared experience in the South.
I've heard so many wonderful stories. Laurie.
Judy, I wonder how, looking back now on the book that you wrote, or thinking about as you were writing it, and now I'm getting a little bit confused about the timing of this, but when you discovered that she had kept secrets from you, did that change anything about what you felt about your past with her?
That's a really good question. So I'm not gonna reveal anything for people who have not read the book yet, but, and don't, notice I said yet. There's an assumption in that yet.
We'll be selling them outside after.
By the way. But while I had already written the book and was way into revising the book. And what you do when you're a writer is you swap manuscripts with another writer, and they read your book and you read their book. And so another writer had read my book and was giving me feedback on the phone. And she just happened to mention this thing that was in the book. I had written it. It was in my manuscript. And it was something about Maddie's childhood that I didn't know. But if you add up numbers, which I obviously don't do if I don't have to, you would know this fact. And so I had to sort of rewrite the book and the ending because now I knew this detail of Maddie's childhood, which she had never told me. So that's what you're referring to. So this is what it tells me. This is exactly what I take from that. That we never really know another person. Isn't that the truth? Bruce, we were talking about that. You just don't know another person. You think you know each other so well, but you can never know somebody else's motivation, intentions, worldview. You think you know them so well, and you really don't know them. And at first, when I discovered this detail, I felt hurt. I felt like, why didn't she tell me this? We were so close. And then I felt maybe she would have been embarrassed to tell me this detail. Maybe she was saving herself. I don't know what went on in her mind. And this is a case where I really don't know what she thought. But when I called Panetta with this news, Panetta, did you know this? Yeah, that's just the way it was. Yeah, she knew it, and she talked to me about it, and all that's in the book. I put it in the book.
But that's not something she would have talked to me. I think she was protecting you.
I think she might have been protecting me or protecting herself. I don't know. But yeah, I really did have to think about it a little bit.
Okay. All right, we got dueling questions here.
Sisters.
We'll start with, let's go. We'll start with, here we go.
Judy, did you, with Maddie, encounter prejudice when you were out in public? You know, when you said you went to Woolworths, I can't help but think about the Woolworths of North Carolina and trying to eat in the cafeteria there or whatever have you. As she took you here, there, and everywhere, did you encounter any suddenly realizing that there was something amiss?
Could y'all all hear his question? Asking, you know, as Daddy and I went here, there, traveled throughout Rock Hill together, was I aware of prejudice, racism, things going on? And I do have several scenes in the book, and they're pretty mild examples of racism, I would say. One particular incident that I write about in the book, Maddie and I were out one Saturday morning and I was skating and she's holding my hand and she's running along beside me as I'm skating. We're holding hands, moving along, and we see our neighbor a few yards up and he's mowing his grass back and forth, back and forth. I'll tell you who it is later. You already know because I didn't use his name. Anyway. And so Maddie pulls on me to stop because she's teaching me this is what you do. You stop and you say hello to people. And so she called out, "Hey, Dr. Harder, how you doing?" And I thought maybe he wouldn't be able to hear her say that because he was doing the lawnmower. But then I saw that he did hear her because he turned toward her voice. He heard her. And then he answered back after she had said, "Hey, Dr. Harder, how you doing?" He answered back, "Hey, Judy," and looked just at me and made a point of looking just at me. He wanted us to know that he was not gonna speak to Maddie. He was not gonna answer her question, "How you doing today?" He was only gonna speak to me. And so I write in the book, did this just happen? You know, she's here. She's a person. She's real. She's not anybody you ignore. And I couldn't tell her how that made me feel. I could not tell her. So there's several instances like that.
And we're going straight down the road.
Judy, I have finished the book and loved it and thought it was beautifully done. I want to know more about, you talk about your parents. I grew up in the Midwest and I have, my sister and I had a European mother, and I'm fascinated by Southern Jews. So you write about your dad employing black folks early during Jim Crow. So how did that, I mean, the information that came from your parents that you just ingested, how did that work in the family dynamic there?
Could y'all hear her question? There's so many different ways to answer that question. So my parents were very active in the Jewish community in Rock Hill. All 12 families. But they were very active. And our house was on the tour of homes every Christmas because we decorated for Christmas. And we had a Hanukkah menorah sitting there with all the Christmas decorations because my mother believed that if there was something to celebrate, you celebrate. That was just her personality. So we celebrated everything. Easter, Christmas, Passover, Hanukkah, everything. We had Easter chicks, we had matzah for Passover. I mean, we did it all. A lot of people have asked me, my parents did not march down the middle of the street with signs. They were not on a mission. And I know a lot of people back then were in the 40s and 50s. They were not. But they did do things that were unusual for that time in that place. They were very progressive and enlightened, I would say. And a lot of times people will say, oh, that must be because they were Jewish. And I don't want that to be the explanation. I don't buy that that's the explanation. I think it was because my father believed that right is right and wrong is wrong. This is how you do things. Would you say that?
I would say that your father was guided by a very well-aligned, strong moral compass. And he didn't do things that were wrong, period.
And
objectively speaking.
He got to decide what was right and what was wrong. And sometimes as his daughter, that wasn't easy. But out in the world, it made him a very ethical person. And my mother was all about empathy, all about empathy. And I think that combination of the two of them is what made our family do the things we did. Does that answer your question?
Books on Southern Judaism, which is unique, because a lot of the folks came down here as peddlers, and they realized I can set up a store and I don't have to travel all over the South to make a living. Now, her father was in law school and had to leave and take a job to support the family, so there's a little different. But that was how, in the 1870s and 1880s, that's how Charlotte's Jewish population, and they mostly had businesses up on 7th Street.
But one way you knew that things were being done maybe a little bit differently in the Kurtz house was Panetta, who my mom mentions, at the maybe post-afternoon, pre-dinner time, Panetta always came over to your house to hang out and sit in the kitchen and talk with Maddie, because it was okay to come over to their house to sit and talk. That's where they could do that.
I remember wondering, could two black maids sit and laugh and talk and visit in any other house in the neighborhood? I don't think they could have. And of course, I was right there too, because that was the in crowd as far as I was concerned. I wanted to be accepted by the two of them. Other questions?
My last question, or my question is, sorry, Judy. Did you get to
You can
speak?
stand up.
That's okay. Did you get to speak to Maddie's child and ever get to know them?
Did y'all have a question?
No.
Did I get to speak with Maddie's child? I don't remember how old I was when I first knew that Maddie had a child, but we did know Minnie pretty early on. She lived with Maddie's brother and sister-in-law in Charlotte, whereas we were living in Rock Hill, of course. I write about this in the book. When I was grown, married with children, and my sister was grown, married with children, and we were living in Charlotte, we had a birthday luncheon for Maddie, 70th, 75th, I can't remember which it was. And we invited all of Maddie's friends and Maddie's relatives, and Minnie, her daughter, who lived now in New York, married with children, came down for the luncheon, and I put the place cards out, and I put myself right next to Minnie, because I wanted to ask her a lot of the questions I had never asked her before. And so I did, and I said to Minnie, you should have been the one being raised by Maddie, not me. I wish that it had been the other way, or somehow that we both could have been raised by her. And Minnie said, oh no, I had very loving parents. I had a wonderful childhood, she said. And I thought that Maddie was just a very loving aunt who came to visit every now and then. A loving aunt who came to visit. Put that under the category of the things that we let be okay. Right? That should be number one.
But Mom maintained a relatively close relationship with Minnie her entire life. Minnie unfortunately passed away within a year after Maddie did, which was unexpected to us at least. But also Minnie's daughters, Mom has been in touch with her throughout the writing of this book. And even when Bob and I lived in New York City, Maddie came up to New York one time to visit Minnie, and Bob and I went up to Minnie's and spent the evening with them. I mean, from my point of view, we knew Minnie pretty well. She was a part of things, very much so, and her daughters as well. They were a lot older than I was, but I knew them all growing up.
And Minnie and I sort of worked together in taking care of Maddie when she was old. I mean, I was the one who found the nursing home, I was the one who moved her in, I was the one who kept up with her there, because Minnie was in New York, but I did it with Minnie's approval and okay with everything. We were sort of a team together. Any other questions?
I've been sitting here wondering what it would have been like for you and for Maddie.
Wait, start your question over.
I've been wondering what it would have been like for you and for Maddie if she had been able to participate in writing the book with you.
Oh boy, could y'all hear that question? What it would have been like for me and for Maddie if she had been able to write the book with me. That's something to think about. That's what I'll think about tonight when I'm going to sleep. I'll just sort of imagine what that would be like. Oh my gosh.
And she was a great writer.
She was.
We
She
have
wrote
letters.
beautiful letters. Yeah. Well, how would you answer that question?
Well, I mean, I think that it would be a lot of cases. You laughed a lot with Maddie in later years. I mean, that's how being with Maddie was. We just laughed a lot. I cooked in the kitchen with her as much as I could. And it was just a lot of laughing and joking around. And so it's like my brain keeps imagining her telling you that you're doing it wrong.
She wasn't critical, but she was.
It was her way of joking.
Yeah. So maybe that's a good place to end, but I'm gonna read a tiny little snippet from the book, just to end it. Around the time I was 4, in 1945, a tiny white frame house was being built on a narrow vacant lot on Myrtle Drive, one street over. Maddie and I watched it rise from the raw earth, the foundation, brick by brick, the house, clapboard by clapboard, eventually painted white, and finally the roof, gray shingle by shingle. Such a cute little house, smallest in the neighborhood by far. A mascot house, a doll house. Every time we walked by, Maddie and I stopped to assess the progress of the construction. Sometimes she said, "Don't you wish me and you could buy that house and just the two of us go live there?" "I do, Maddie," I always answered. "I do." Sometimes I said, "Let's just buy that house and move in." Suits me fine, she always answered. That house would have fit us perfectly. I was not only a kid, I was small for my age. Maddie was plump, but not much taller than 5 feet. Of course, I would not have wanted to leave my parents or my brother and sister, but the house was really cute, and Maddie and I would have so much fun arranging our furniture, hanging pictures, cooking meals together in the tiny kitchen. Were we just filling the air with dreamy talk? Or were we saying something more urgent? If the two of us went off to live in our own make-believe, protected world, could we bypass what loomed out in the real world? I think I'll end that, and thank y'all for going.